Welcome everyone to the Lead Generation World Podcast. My name is Michael Furry. We've got a really great show for you today, so thanks for joining me. We've got Jen Capstraw joining us. She is a renowned thought leader with email marketing. She's spoken at many different conferences. In fact, in 2019, she spoke at 25 different conferences. So she's really made her name for providing excellent information around email. But almost more importantly, she's also the co-founder of Women of Email, which is a group of over 4,000 women across the world that have joined together to help support each other navigate the industry. She's also helping form another group called the Women of Martech, and with the same mission. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. Next time we're going to bring her around and talk about email, but we really wanted to sort of dive into the issue of diversity and women in the workplace, and especially within our digital marketing world and our industry. So let's bring on Jen and get this started. All right, welcome to the Lead Generation World Podcast. My name's Mike. I've got Jen Capstraw here with us today. Really exciting to have her because she's been focusing on a number of different things that I'm really interested in. One is the Women of Martech, Women of Email, and then of course email separately. I'm always intrigued, one, for my personal benefit of how to be successful with email. So we'll try to dig in and maybe pull out some things from her, tips around email as well. But Jen, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Appreciate the opportunity, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah. So we were just talking. You're in New York, actually just across you said the river there in Jersey, right? And so You've been dealing with everything that's been going on. Hopefully, we'll be out from underneath this. But one thing I saw on your LinkedIn profile was last year you went on like a record-breaking conference speaking tour. It looked like you did, I think 23. Is that what it was? Speaking engagements at conferences?
That sounds about right. I did the math on how many hours I spent on stage because it was a combination of short sessions and workshops. And I came up with over 67 hours on stage, and only 15 minutes of that was pay for play. So for 2020, I think by November, I had invitations to about 26 conferences. I didn't accept all of them. I didn't confirm all of them. I did expect there to be more as well. But the world changed, right? And so I've done some webinars and some interviews here and there, and I discovered I actually am enjoying being a homebody.
Yeah, you don't quite have the same opportunities this year. But so was it intentional last year, or how did that come about? Was that sort of a buildup, or you're like, you know what, 2019, I'm going to get on the road and I'm going to get out in front of people?
Well, I would say probably starting in 2015, 2016, I had decided I wanted to start positioning myself as a thought leader and do some public speaking. I had done a little bit, but it was usually for the technology companies I was working for at their conferences. Yeah. And in 2016, I was at Adobe, and they gave me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Adobe at an email conference. And it was my first time out in the wild. And it was an opportunity that I wanted to really make matter. So I had lots of terrible jokes, a lot of self-deprecating humor, embarrassed myself a little bit, but I made it memorable, and it was a stepping stone to where I am today. So last year, I spent more time on stage than any other thought leader in the email industry. Something I'm really proud of, but that wasn't necessarily a goal. It's just that the opportunities kept coming and coming and coming. Yeah. And because I was an evangelist for a MarTech company, that's a great way to generate leads. And so I was accepting the opportunities because my company wasn't paying for my stage time. In fact, it wasn't appropriate for me to accept speaker fees since I was representing my company, but I could get them to cover things like travel and expenses like that. And it was a win-win. The conference got talent and content that people found engaging, and my company got leads as long as I wasn't selling from the stage, being overt about it, yep, exchanging value for that lead information, and just getting them into that lead nurturing cycle. So I did the math. I was generating $5 leads, and usually events like that, the average is about $800 per lead. So $5, I am an extreme value.
Yes, you are. That's amazing. Yeah, that's really, really great. But without a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, though, too. I mean, that's a lot of travel. That's a lot of work. It's not, that easy just to make all that happen and drive down your lead cost of $5. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not as easy as it sounds.
Draining. It was
Yeah.
exhausting. And I decided, okay, I'll do this for one more year, and then I'm really going to have to look at what I'm doing with my life and
And
find another path.
yeah, and COVID came around and that answered it for you, I guess, a little bit. So
It did, and I also I've left that job since then, and have been actually giving consideration to brand side jobs and staying put, which I never would have considered before. So, COVID's got us all reevaluating our lives, where we want to live geographically, the kind of work we want to do, and
yeah.
I like change. I embrace change, so I think it's been great. I mean, it sucks that people are dying. Like, let me
Oh,
be
right.
clear,
Yeah.
it's
No, you're
difficult.
yeah. Yeah,
But
you're
the effect
embracing
on
the
my
challenges.
yeah, the effect on my career, I don't perceive as negative, even though I'm unemployed technically.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's get to know Jen a little bit. For those that don't know you, like myself, tell me a little bit about, you were initially, out of college, you got into broadcasting and communication, right?
Yes, yeah, I worked in radio and TV for about 5 years.
And then, so where was the transition? Just try to give me, I know there's probably a really long story there, but I'm kind of curious, how you got to Adobe and how you sort of got there and then into email.
I started working at the radio station in my college town. So not at the college station, but the legit actual small town radio station, which had a huge reach and a massive fan base. And my radio teacher was the program director there, and he gave me little part-time jobs to do. And some of it was behind the scenes, a little bit of it was on the air. And I turned that into a job at a TV station in Richmond, Virginia, as my first job after graduation. That led to relationships with producers and reporters and photographers who served as mentors to me and were unbelievably generous in helping me get my feet wet and pursue my dreams. And then within about a year and a half, I landed a job as the midday news anchor for an all news radio station. And but radio does not pay well, TV does not pay well, so I was usually working 3 jobs at a time, just to rent a room in the suburbs and pay my basic necessities. So I was a DJ on a light rock station. I was the lottery, the Virginia lottery hostess, the picking the balls on TV was like my little side hustle. I was producing news, and early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd be producing news for the morning anchor. Gosh, what didn't I do? Traffic reporter. I was also a traffic reporter. So I was doing all of these things at the same time, and in that moment, I didn't realize quite how much I had accomplished. By the time I was 23, 24, and by the time I was 25, I'd won 6 Associated Press Awards for excellence in journalism, but I still couldn't afford food. So I did not feel successful at all. And I actually ended up getting married and giving it all up because I couldn't maintain the schedule and the commitments while I was married. And he made a lot more money than me. So I gave it all up and we relocated. And I regret that, giving it all up. It was just unfortunate. If I was making a decent living, I certainly would have continued and perhaps could have gone quite far. But we relocated,
so that was your turning point. So that's what I was kind of wondering. You were doing sort of the communication or the radio and TV, and then all of a sudden sort of went, and that was that life change that sort of brought you towards down this other path.
Right. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about like women in MarTech and these associations that I'm involved in. I was having a conversation last week with Melissa Ledesma, who's the executive director of Women of MarTech. And she mentioned this stat about the confidence gap and how the confidence gap between men and women, the turning point seems to be age 25. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was 25 years old and I was so beaten down by the challenges. Even though I had so many successes, I couldn't succeed enough financially. I was putting my groceries on a credit card and I was not living a luxurious life by any means. And I just gave up. at age 25. And I think it's something that a lot of women can relate to. But I transitioned to something else. I worked for a nonprofit for about 5 years, maybe 6, and then ended up relocating to New York City, at which point the marriage ended and my real career, I felt like that's the point at which it began.
So age 25, do you think that's typically a relationship thing, where, adults, I'd hate to say, when I look back at age 25, I hardly got to a starting point, frankly, let alone a turning point for me. But at that age, 25, 26, 27, that's usually sometimes around a point where you get into a serious relationship or whatever it may be and start to partner with somebody else that has other dreams or whatever it may be, and you have to come together or go apart, whatever it may be. But do you think that's sort of what the catalyst is of that change that Melissa was referencing, is more around that, or is it something else?
I don't think it's that. It's easy to see the relationship between those two things in my life. But I was in the South. This was the 1990s, early 2000s. So people are getting married younger. People are getting serious younger. I had friends who had children already. I was like an old maid by 25 and being unmarried. So the world doesn't really work that way anymore, except in the smallest little towns. And so women are not really giving consideration to really serious relationships as early, I don't think. So it's just this, being confronted with extra obstacles is what's knocking them back and making them, I entered the workforce gung-ho, like I am smart, I am savvy, I have something to offer, and I want to go. And I thought if I worked hard that I would be compensated for that. And that relationship didn't necessarily exist for me. And I think that that's something that a lot of women run into. They're just not advancing the way that men are advancing. Men are perceived as having potential, a young man, aspiring young man, and an aspiring young woman has to prove that value often in a way that young men do not. And it's just an unfortunate bias. I think it's usually unconscious. It's not intentional, but it continues.
Yeah. What led to the women of email? What sort of was that catalyst for you? What spurred that? Was it your experiences that you had years prior in the industry and trying to bring women together? What was it?
Well, I have been involved with a women's organization, an online women's organization, since 2001 or 2. I can't even remember. It's been so long. So almost 20 years, and served in an executive leadership position there for about 5 of those years. So I had experience with online communities of women. And I also had 5 years experience in association management, the years that I spent at the nonprofit during my marriage. And then I was an aspiring thought leader, and I went to that conference that I mentioned where I'm like, I'm going to make a big splash. And there was an incredible lack of female representation on the stage. And between the sessions, women were kind of awkwardly milling around and introducing themselves to each other. You'd see like a woman across the room and be like, I should go know her because she's like me. And there was a panel discussion, and the theme was like a rapid fire panel discussion, and they had 10 individuals from kind of the coolest startups in the space, and the moderator was asking a question and you'd have like 30 seconds to answer it or something like that. And there were 9 men up there and 1 woman, and they put her dead in the center of this panel. And the first question was asked, and the first person answers, second, third, fourth, and she stood up and said, where are the women at? Where are they? And everyone kind of was like, yeah, where are they? And this was the very first time that this conference had taken place. Well, about a week later, another woman who was a speaker at that conference wrote an article about this. Like, hey, there's a real problem with female representation at email conferences. Here are some ways that we could potentially solve this. And it led to a conversation in an industry forum. People started talking about it, and people were being polite and trying to approach the issue in a very thoughtful way. And, here's my experience as a woman, and here's, my perspective as a man. And it was going along okay. It was great that the conversation was happening. And then all of a sudden this man said, I hate female speakers, and here's why. Exactly. Exactly. And then a woman chimed in, me too, I agree.
Oh my God.
Short version is Women of Email was born within 24 hours. We had 100 members within a couple of days, and today we're at 4,700 members in 50 countries.
Amazing.
One of our big priorities is a speakers bureau. So we're matching women with conference organizers, webinars, interviews, all sorts of things. And we've done a very poor job of quantifying those successes, unfortunately, because it's a passion project. We are 100% donation funded, 100% volunteer run. We're making some changes right now that should enable us to raise a lot more money in the future so that we can pull our act together and be a little more formalized. But we've come a very long way with very, very little budget and very little manpower or woman power.
Yeah. So
But one of the big things that
go
we
ahead.
have seen, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but we've seen a huge trend. Like we're helping women, pitch to conferences as well. But because it became more normalized, right? Women are seeing their friends and peers and people they admire going for it and doing it. And so more women have started throwing their hat in the ring without us even intervening or being involved. It's been normalized. And you almost never see a conference that's not 50-50, if not female dominated now, which is amazing. But quick stat, email industry is actually roughly about 50-50 men and women. We just aren't seeing as many women in the senior leadership positions, but just from just looking at all people across the pretty even split.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I like to say that I've seen a trend too, over the number of years, and certainly as our own conference, we try our best to get as more diversity out there as possible, whether it's women or minorities, any other minority. But I want to go back to something you mentioned, which was why aren't the question she stood up and said, where's all the women? Um, Back then, or maybe even now, why is it that there aren't more women? Is it a systemic issue? Is it a programming thing? Is it a confidence thing? What is it?
All of the above. So I'd say the confidence issue is part of it. That age 25, you're already starting to feel defeated as a woman. Not every woman, but there's a lot of studies that are showing that. And so it's like, what? I don't have anything to say. I don't know if I can do it. I'm afraid of being judged up there. And women are more afraid of this because it's happening to them in the workplace more often. But then conference organizers, if they're not thinking about it and prioritizing it, then they're just kind of putting their feelers out to their own network. And that, which is a natural starting point for a conference organizer. If you're well networked, you've got some clout in your industry, and you go, I want to start a conference, you're going to start with your network. But if you're a man, your network is probably predominantly male. And so it's not necessarily intentional. It's just you're reaching out to your people, they're reaching out to their people, and most of the people you all know collectively are men. So until you step back and think about it and figure out, well, what are the right ways of finding new talent? It's difficult to do unless you go searching and taking proactive measures. Is that something you're running into?
Yeah, 100%. I mean when I started the conference, it was exactly as you said. It's okay. Find experts in these areas that immediately, and you could have confidence to bring in, and boom, and voila, it's a bunch of men. Yeah, Grant, we had women speaking in part as well, but I think to your point is what I was thinking is after when I reflected back on the conference, it was like, wow, I need to do a better job at being more precise about who's up on stage and is it a minority, bringing more diversity to the stage, because I think then that reflects on the crowd too. It's not just about having women be on stage, but it's also having more women in the crowd. And I think,
Right.
when you have to, you sort of have to make a concerted effort to do that to some extent, especially when a network is mainly, men or whatever it could be. And that's why I'm really so excited to work with Kathy and Melissa and yourself to bring, more and more experts that are women onto the stage and a part of lead generation world for next year. One thing I saw,
You know,
yeah,
may I interrupt you quickly?
yeah, yeah,
Um, that moment of realization is so powerful for a man who has the ability to be an ally for women. And the gentleman who put together that rapid fire panel where he got basically called out,
yeah,
he responded to that conversation about the lack of female representation. And he said, I reached out to all of these vendors. I asked them to send somebody to represent that vendor. This is who they sent to me. And I didn't really think about it. Right? He wasn't making excuses. He was just explaining what had happened. A year later, he launched his own conference and he became the hugest advocate for women of email. He gave us a platform to talk about diversity and inclusion in the industry. He's made us pro bono sponsors of that conference every single year since then. So it took that moment of making the mistake to turn him into probably our biggest ally.
yeah. And I think that's, a lot of, we all live in a bubble, right? Our own little bubble and our own world. And until we are able to recognize an issue, we can't take action on it. And sometimes recognizing an issue requires being shaken, like, hey, this is not working, or this is wrong. I mean, case in point, everything that's been going on with Black African Americans. I mean, like, it's not a whole the situation is where a white guy like myself sometimes needs to be shaken, not because, to go, hey, this needs change, and to be able to, like, realize, oh, this is how I can affect change. So same thing, like I was saying, in our conference, we had very few Black African Americans there, and I look back and go, what the heck's going on? Why is this? And so we've been doing a lot of, talking and doing a lot of work with the same intent, to bring more diversity, not just on stage, but also in the crowd as well. But it's, to the point is, it's just about realization. You can't have empathy or understanding until you realize that there's something wrong going on. And sometimes we're all just blinded by our own, like I said, in our own bubble. And so it takes being someone standing up going, hey, where's all the women at? Hey, where's all the minorities at? And go, I don't know. Where are they? And then start to figure out, okay, now we can make a change. Now there's people that don't want to make a change and want to continue to ignore it and all this sort of stuff, but that's a whole other issue. But I think, sometimes you have to be sort of shaken up a little bit to figure out, okay, there's a problem. Now we need to take action and make a change. So kudos to that gentleman that was shaken and took action versus shaken and ran away and, put his head in the hole, a hole or something like that. But so yeah, no, that's great. One thing I saw too, which comes around the efforts with being a mentor, was I saw a stat that women are less likely to have access to senior leaders and executives. So this stat here, so there's a survey, and I'll have to find the source, but it said that people that had less likely to senior leadership in a workplace, men had said 27% of them said they didn't have access, 35% of women didn't, and then Black women had 41% said they didn't have access to senior leadership. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, they're getting stopped at a certain point within the workplace because they don't even have access to talk with senior leadership, to have that sort of mentorship conversation or learning or whatever it may be. How does, I don't know if you've seen that or you feel that, and how does sort of a association like the Women of Email or Women of Martech, how can they help get access to leadership, whether it's women or men within the industry?
I have not seen those stats. That's really interesting and some excellent points. Um, you know, it sounded like the problem is having access to leadership within their own organization.
Yes.
So, I mean, the burden there in many regards is on the leadership to say, we have an open door policy. We prioritize diversity and inclusion. We need different points of view to be effective at what we're doing, and we're committed to helping you succeed. You have to create a culture, a speak up culture where everybody feels comfortable speaking up and being heard. There are definitely a lot of studies that show that more diverse teams produce higher quality products and programs, they generate more revenue because everybody has a different perspective. If you were to hire everybody with exactly the same background and credentials and life experiences, you're not going to see radical problem solving. Everyone's kind of approaching the problem the same way. So when you have more diversity represented and you have an environment where people are comfortable and are never feel afraid of speaking their mind, then that generates revenue, that contributes to the bottom line, and you have happy employees, and you're doing what's simply right. In terms of having access to executives and mentors outside of your work environment, because maybe that's just not a reality for you, or you're trying to level up and get to an environment where you would have that kind of access and culture. There are mentor programs out there. They're hard to find and they are very difficult to administer. And it's something that we have honestly run into with Women of Email. We really wanted to match people, and we were inviting men to be mentors. If you were open to having a man as a mentor, then why not, right? If they want to be an ally and they can offer you insights and there's not any concern about the way that they would treat a woman, that it would be different than a man, then why not pair up men with women? Every single one of my personal mentors in my lifetime have been men, because they were the ones who had the experience and they were the ones that were accessible to me. So mentoring programs, we are going to start ours back up. We're making some big changes to get it going again. Women of Martech is going to have a mentoring program. So that you will have that access. In the meantime, just attending webinars and panel discussions and joining these organizations and interacting with these higher level people that maybe you admire or aspire to follow in their footsteps, you would not believe that they are willing to talk to you, maybe not in a formal mentor situation, but me personally, I usually give a minimum of 30 minutes to anyone who asks for my time. But the burden is on you as the mentee to use that time wisely and respectfully. You need to have clarity in your objective in those conversations. You need to be respectful that you are consuming valuable time. Like, people at that level may have billable rates of $500 and up, and they are giving that to you. So respect that. And if they are connecting you with other people in their network to help move you forward, that also you need to extend that level of respect to all of those people. I have gotten the tiniest little tokens of thanks have meant a lot to me. When I've been connected to someone that I don't necessarily know, I have a nice little 30-minute chat with them, and they sent me a $10 gift certificate to Starbucks. I was blown away by that they appreciated me. Like, it's just a $10 Starbucks card, but it was a gesture that meant a lot. So when you do find people, respect them and express your appreciation.
Yeah. You got me thinking about sort of the workplace and leadership too, and how conversations I've had with women say they're afraid sometimes to be assertive or speak up or ask for things because they'll be deemed, aggressive or or the bitch or whatever it is. How does is that something that's how do you respond to that? Is that something that is still very challenging to navigate within the workplace, being assertive, asking for what you deserve, all those sorts of things?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been perceived that way. I'm still perceived that way. It is a problem to say, here's what I brought to the table, and let's talk about this. Let's talk about the path forward. Let's talk about compensation. Let's talk about, my future. Because, look, I'm killing it, and I want to keep killing it, and I like to be compensated well for that. It's difficult, and I have on more than one occasion brought those successes to the table and told, no, absolutely not. And it was a problem when I was junior, it was a problem when I was senior, and it's not something that's ever gone away from me. So it often, for me personally, I had to leave companies in order to move up. I've felt blocked from advancement in many environments. So when you do speak up and you say, this is what I'm doing and this is what I want, you are taking a huge risk. It's true. And people have that fear of failure. fear of being perceived a certain way. I flip that on its head. If you are afraid of change, perhaps you should be more afraid of what happens if nothing changes. And that's what terrifies me. I'm not going to be stuck. I'm not going to stay in this position forever, especially if it's causing a mounting frustration, right? Or a feeling of not being appreciated. That's not good for me or my employer. So don't, you need to release the fear of failure, and harness it and rechannel it. Fear of, what if nothing ever changes? I mean, that's my best advice to anybody, men too. Just do it. Just do it.
I love it. Yeah, no,
I've been fired, I have been fired. I have been punished. I have been harmed in many ways, but I'm not going to stop.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that advice because I think people do just need to break down some walls and just go, right? And do what they believe is right, what they think is right for themselves, and advocate for themselves. And I don't think you can go wrong doing that. More specifically though, is there like any advice you'd give a young woman, 25, 27, that's, in their career and having that sort of challenges about how to sort of navigate it from, how to present themselves in a way that, and so while I'm asking this question, I'm even offended that I have to ask this question, that somebody has to like maybe mold themselves a little bit differently or walk a tightrope to some extent on how to be assertive at the same time not offensive, when somebody else, a male, could be just as assertive and offensive, frankly, and get away with it. So I'm almost offended by by me asking the question, but at the same time, is there specific advice, or is it, what, like you said, is it just do it?
It's certainly okay to seek out professionals in your network for that kind of advice, people you admire who maybe have the job that you're dreaming of one day, and express that fear and ask them for their advice on how to present yourself. If you feel comfortable having that conversation with your immediate manager, you should do that. But before you do any of that, you need to start documenting and quantifying your own successes for yourself. Have your own running list going and think about what kind of impact did you have on your organization? Did you improve efficiency? Can you estimate by how much? What campaign did you launch that was just a huge success story? What was your role in it? Even just small things, if you're a contributor to a huge success, that is still your success. You can't take ownership of the whole success, but you can take ownership of contributing to a success. So you need to be documenting all of that and having that running list going at all times. Know your value. And then it's fine to have that transparent conversation with your manager or maybe with resources in your HR team, like, hey, I really want to put together a case for advancement. Can you give me some advice on how to do that? Right? Just reach out to people and ask if it's truly a concern, but don't throw your hands up and just not do it at all because of fear.
Yeah. Let's talk about one more thing before we jump into some email conversations. And let's kind of circle it back to the conferences that, conference harassment and workplace harassment is obviously a big deal. And I think it was, one of the articles I read is number one issue, for women is workplace harassment. Looking at conferences, I had a woman email me just the other day and expressed, some issues that were just where a man was being just completely rude and an asshole to her for really no reason. And it wasn't, there was no sexual harassment or anything like that, but it's more of a demeaning, male chauvinistic nonsense that was taking place. Um, but when we look at a conference and we look at if there's a lot of males there and they're, if it's in Las Vegas, whatever it may be, what's been your experiences with harassment at conferences, and how is it evolving or changing, hopefully for the better?
I have experienced harassment at conferences. I've experienced harassment in the workplace. I worked for a company where the sales team had its like Monday morning early morning meeting every week. And one week, the topic of the meeting was my breasts and whether they were real or fake and who was going to be the first to find out, right? I did nothing about it. And I regret that. Fast forward a few years, that pivotal conference where so many things happened, that launching point for so many things that I've described so far, I experienced harassment at that conference. As I mentioned, it was my first time out in the wild at a conference that was not hosted by my employer. And so I was exposed to all these people that I had admired as thought leaders in the industry, but was hobnobbing with for the very first time. And I was introduced to a man there who had a lot of influence in the industry, and he seemed to take an interest in me and my ideas. And I was very excited to make a new friend, someone who had influence. This was great. And I thought that that meant that he was open to helping me position myself as a thought leader. And after dinner one night, he invited a group of people to join him for cocktails before bed. And so I was like, terrific, this guy, he seems safe. Mm-hmm. I would be comfortable having a drink with him. I don't think it's going to turn weird. Well, it most certainly did turn weird. And he actually leaned in and kissed me that night. And I don't know, and I blamed myself, and I didn't talk about it for a very long time. I wondered what I did to make him think that I was open to that. I blamed myself. I was ashamed that it happened. And I didn't even tell my closest friends in the industry who it was for ages. And it turned into long distance harassment over the course of 2 years, where I was receiving messages that were very bizarre and very inappropriate. I was interfacing with him at more and more events. He was a vendor to the company that I worked for at the time. I had to ultimately report it to legal. They investigated. They said, you have plenty of evidence. We believe that your version of events is true. We're not going to tell him that we're aware of this. We're just going to ask him to sign this harassment clause that as a vendor, he can't harass our employees. And then I left that company and the harassment continued. It finally stopped over the past 2 years when I think I reached a point in my career where he realized it was dangerous to keep messing with me. But I was talking to attorneys about, like, is this guy going to mess up my new job for me? Do I need to get a cease and desist to get him to get away from me? Like, because even though I wasn't doing anything wrong, if I have drama swirling around me, that does not reflect well on me. That does not make me appealing as, an evangelist for a company, as a face of a company. So I was very worried that he would disrupt my career. So this went on for a couple of years, and it did finally stop. So it's something that matters a lot to me. And there was another incident at another email conference where a drunken man was physically touching multiple women in a bar after conference hours had ended for the day. He was kicked out of the event and not permitted to attend the following day. But he hung around the bar in the hotel and waited for more people to come and continued his harassment. It was a huge ordeal. He followed a woman back to her hotel room. He demanded that the front desk call her and allow him to speak to her on the phone. So these things happen, and people are terrified of talking about them. What Women of Email did at that point was we created a harassment committee to come together and look at the problem. And many of the women who volunteered for that were at that conference where all that happened, and some of them were witness to that event. And they did a lot of research and did a lot of interviews and compiled their recommendations. And basically what the finding was that every conference needs to have a code of conduct. It needs to be more than these are the ways that you're expected to behave. It needs to actually document, who do you contact in the event of harassment? How do you do that? What is the process? Where do you find those people? Do you email them? Do you text them? What will the consequences be? How will I be treated? Do I have to be anonymous? What are my risks? And make sure that everyone is aware this is a policy. This will not be tolerated. We've got people lined up to deal with this 24 hours a day. You have to make it clear that what happens after 5 p.m. when the conference ends for the day it's extending to the evening events and the evening hours and the post-evening events, because that's what happened to me. I was no longer at a conference sponsored event, but there was not going to be any consequences for that person at that event. So I'd only be harming myself by coming forward about it. So an organization that's done a great job with this is a company called Litmus. And so a lot of what our committee documented as recommendations came directly from their conference organizers advising us on what they had done. They've been very successful with it, and they bounce people. There's no second chances. It's one and done. So you just really have to enforce that. And it's hard to have staff for that at all times. Like, someone has to always be accessible and sober, right? So we have a tendency to drink at these events, and especially conference organizers are celebrating their success. So somebody needs to be sober and responsive 24 hours.
Yeah, no, that is really, really great, and something we're going to work on. And because one of the issues is that I think another stat was, a third of women have been harassed at the workplace, but only 60%, or no, 60% of them don't ever say anything. So more than half of them, don't say anything, whether it's at a conference or wherever it may be. Just, hold it. They don't say anything, and so whether that's a function of insecurity about talking about it or not having the resources to do it, maybe both. But I think a conference like us or anybody should have a code of conduct and a resource. So I appreciate that idea a lot. So what's the mission right now of tell me a little bit about the benefits of women of email, and becoming a member, and what do they sort of get, and what's the mission there?
Women of Email and Women of MarTech, both, membership is free.
Okay.
So that is to ensure that those resources are accessible to everybody who qualifies for membership, because often the people who need it the most can afford it the least. And so we have recommended donations depending on how you've benefited from the organization. Actually, the majority of our donations come from men, surprisingly, but it's free and accessible to all. The biggest benefit that members get from Women of Email is our community. We've got, you don't have to be a member of our association in order to be a member of our Facebook group. And we just threw it on Facebook because it was a convenient thing to do when we were starting up, and envisioned some kind of a transfer over to some kind of a forum. Maybe we manage on our own website or something, but Facebook is working so well for us, we've intentionally kept it there. And we've got nearly 7,000 women there now. So it is extremely high engagement. It is a very positive and uplifting environment. And we almost never have to moderate anything. It's very, very rare. If you come there to, make a joke about something that email people would appreciate, share a meme, you can come for that. Our mascot is goats. You might notice I've got like little goat things, kind of positioned around my office. And there's a goat in our logo. People will come and share goat memes, like adorable baby goats frolicking, just like a funny little middle of the day uplifting thing. But people will also come and be like, my code is not working in this email client. What should I do? Or I can't figure out dark mode. Somebody help me. Or my boss says we should buy a list, but I don't think I'm supposed to buy lists. Can you help me formulate my argument against this? Or anyone have a suggestion for this nurturing strategy or this welcome campaign? So people are coming there with their questions, and then you've got thousands of people who give you wonderful advice, and there's no fear of being attacked or told your question is stupid, which is something that I've personally experienced in another forum. Not by chance the same forum where people were saying that they hated female speakers. I presented a controversial point of view on A/B testing, and I was attacked for it. And I'm like, hey, this is just logic to me. And in the years since, it's been about 5 years since then, my point of view has become a lot more mainstream. It's kind of funny. Yeah. So in addition to our online community, we've got our Speakers Bureau. About 1,500 of our members have signed up for the Speakers Bureau. So when organizers come to me looking for talent, I've got a whole database to draw from. And we also help with presentation proposals. We'll work with women on their content and talking through their talk tracks with them if they want that level of support. I mentioned that our mentoring program was on pause. We have a scholarship program for conferences. So when we're working with conference attendees, we'll ask them for some free passes, and then we have an application process. And number one priority is need, right? Do you have it? Could you otherwise attend this conference? Does your company have budget for it? Do you personally have budget for it? Followed by, are you a member of a marginalized group? Tell us all the reasons why you deserve this, that you don't have any other ways to get to this event. And we've got one premium event that happens twice a year that includes luxury accommodations, 4-star meals, activities like skiing, boating. And so it's a lot harder to choose who gets those because we only get a couple for each of those events. The others, we usually get about 10 passes, and usually every single person who qualifies for potentially getting a pass gets a pass in many cases, and especially the people that we prioritize because they're in a marginalized group. So those are like our biggest benefits. We've got more to come. And then in terms of Women of MarTech, Women of MarTech's priority is to promote and amplify women, their successes and achievements, their innovations. And this can be any woman who's in MarTech, like working for a MarTech company, or any woman who's using MarTech. So that's a huge group of women. So whatever you're doing that's tied to revenue successes, efficiency, diversity and inclusion, or even like your social responsibility, they will celebrate that with you. They will amplify you through social media. They might in the future be looking at things like ways to get you more visibility through press releases. But the idea is to get more recognition so that you have more credibility. And that's a weapon in escalating your career and building it up. Like if all these different people and sources are saying this is an amazing person who's done something significant, that takes you far. And women are scared to death to toot their own horn. So when someone else is doing it for you, it's a lot easier to share that on LinkedIn, to retweet that and be like, oh, humble brag, I did this thing, right? But it's also about women lifting other women up, supporting each other, amplifying each other, because we're not competing, right? There's room for all of us.
100%.
It's not a competition, and that's been a problem. I think it's not so much a problem now as it was 20 years ago when I was fresh in my career, but there are women who will kind of shun other women, push them away. They think that there's only room for one woman, and that's the product of patriarchal environments. It's a woman who's trying to align with the men because she's afraid of how she'll be treated if she's treated like a woman. So the idea is, I'm like you. You should know I'm like you. I deserve to be at the top with you, unlike those other women. And that is extremely harmful. And
Well, it was like
once
that woman that woman that stood up and said, I don't like women speakers either. Right?
Exactly. So women who don't support other women are just as big a problem. And looking back on my own early career, I could see where maybe I bought into that mentality a little bit. And I had to humbly go, wow, I was part of the problem, and I don't ever want to be that again. And so I've really committed to championing other women in my workplace. Was something I started doing at an early time, and now I'm doing it, broadly through Women of MarTech and Women of Email.
Yeah, well, I'm really, really happy to have met you, and I want to congratulate you on all the effort that you're doing, because you are making a big difference. I mean, it's clear just by the numbers and the effort that you're doing and putting in, and probably the results that are coming out of Women of Email, and then soon Women of MarTech. So I mean, really a sincere congratulations for what you're doing. And I'm gonna have to take you up on the offer to bring you back again, because I really want to talk about email, but we just don't have enough time today to do that. And and another note on with Lead Generation World, please include Lead Generation World for free passes for women. We could talk about that later and how we can help get more involved with both groups. But yeah, if anybody wants to like reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you, and talk more about any of the initiatives that you've got going on?
You can always find me on Twitter at Jen Capstraw. I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to shoot me an email, jen@womenofemail.org. And the lovely leaders of Women of Martech asked me to give one quick plug.
Yes.
In addition to like inviting anyone who identifies as a woman into the organization, if you are touching Martech in any way, they've got 3 committees and they're looking for committee members. The Activation Committee that handles logistics and organizing events, the Cheering and Motivation Committee, the Pep Talkers,
Yep.
and the Diversity and Equal Opportunity Committee. So if you're interested in joining the organization, again, it's free, womenofmartech.com, and express your interest in any of those committees, and they would love to talk to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity.